This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Yours truly, and we're shaking and baking today. I mean, we had a great show. Later on, you're going to hear from former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, Roy Moore, who's a friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years. He's running for the U.S. Senate. And, of course, he would be a different kind of senator, somebody who would not roll over, stuff money into his pocket, and walk off fat and happy. He's somebody who will fight for your liberty and for justice. And he is a lawyer, so we have a lot of things in common. I might also add, he's also somebody who, during the years when we were wanting President Obama to actually submit a real birth certificate to various election authorities, he's the only one who issued a ruling. It was a dissenting ruling while he was Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, saying that if you want to run for president in Alabama, you have to actually present your birth certificate. And that's what the issue was about, not whether or not the president was born overseas or not, although there certainly were questions about that, but whether or not you actually had to show that you were eligible to be president as a natural-born citizen. He's also someone who stood up for having the Ten Commandments displayed in his courthouse, and he lost his job as a judge over that. And in fact, there is a Ten Commandments right over the bench in the Supreme Court. Yet, hypocritically, that cost him his position as a judicial officer. And of course, later, whether or not you agree with gay marriage or not, he stood up for that. He said, that's not constitutional. It's not in our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution or the Alabama Constitution, that protects those rights. And he said, I cannot enforce this as Chief Justice. And, of course, that resulted in him losing his job as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's a lot like me. And I believe that this is a man, and I've never endorsed anybody, and I don't do it as a public interest chief or advocate. I do it in my own personal capacity. I believe he's the kind of person that we need in the U.S. Senate. There is no one right now. And you've heard on previous shows, Bob Barr. He was one of the only congressmen, in fact, the only one that I could ever count on that ever had any sense of right and wrong or integrity, who wasn't slithering around on Capitol Hill, who stood up for what he said. A lot of them say great things, but when it comes time to actually doing it, they're nowhere to be found. Usually they're in the green room at Fox News because they're more interested in publicity than actually doing anything. But this is a person who I want you to listen to. But let's talk first about something I am raising with former Chief Justice Roy Moore, and that is the issue that came up this week with regard to Charlottesville. Now, I'm going to give it to you from my perspective. I am an adopted Southerner, in effect. I spent my adult life in the South. I attended Duke University. I graduated in 1973 on the same day, ironically, that former independent counsel Ken Starr graduated from Duke Law School. I was an undergraduate. I later went on and went to Emory University School of Law in Atlanta. I understand Southern heritage. I appreciate Southern heritage. Certainly slavery was abhorrent, but the Civil War was not fought solely because of slavery. It was because the North, in large part, and they used slavery as a wedge, wanted to dominate the South. The South had an agrarian economy, agriculture. The North was industrial, and it was a rivalry. And slavery, although it should have been abolished and was just one part of the Civil War. And there many people died in the Civil War. People believed strongly in Dixie. People believed in their homeland. And just like there are GIs that go off to fight in Afghanistan that really don't want to be there and get killed for what has proven to be over the years little to no reason because the politicians don't let them win the war, there were soldiers in Dixie who went to fight, because that was the patriotic thing to do. They weren't traitors. They weren't trying to destroy the United States in the sense that they wanted to destroy the North. They just wanted to have their sovereignty. So to desecrate statues, and just last week, a statue was torn down in Durham, North Carolina, of a Confederate soldier who died for this country. For his country. It was the South, of course, at the time. Frankly, is an outrage. And it's correct for President Trump to say, where does it end? We now know that that evil charlatan, Al Sharpton, who's whipped up so much racial division, and we saw the results of that in Charleston, not Charleston, but Charlottesville last week. He now wants to defund the Jefferson Memorial. There are others who want to remove George Washington from any monument, or the President of the United States, the first president, and others. And to somehow negate these people's importance in American history, these are icons, these are our founding fathers, to trample on their graves is part, in my view, of a broader effort by the left with regard to people like George Soros, who finances the left, with regard to the hateful group Antifa, which also created violence in Charlottesville last week. Yes, there was guilt on both sides. The president was right. This is an effort to destroy this country by taking away its heritage. Where does it stop? And the president was right to say that. And of course, when he said that, and CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post and the New York Times jumped all over it because they want to finish him off, they want to destroy him, and it wasn't working with regard to the so-called Russian collusion, so they have to basically brand him as a racist, as a white supremacist. Where does it end? And he was right to speak out, because what the left wants to do, a lot of people on the left, not everybody, but these radicals on the left, they want to deconstruct this country. They want to take it down to ground zero. And once they destroy it, and once they take away our heritage and the vision of our founding fathers and what this republic means, they can build it up in their own socialist communist image. They want to destroy the country as we know it. And frankly, they're doing a good job. And of course, who was it that whipped up this racial divide? African Americans were doing quite well. I mean, it wasn't perfect. There was still discrimination. I'm a Jewish Christian. I understand what discrimination is about. My people were slaves back in Egypt. You remember Moses, set my people free, let my people go. We all have experienced adversity, but there was progress being made until Obama came in with his Attorney General Eric Holder and his one that succeeded that, Loretta Lynch, and they whipped up this racial hatred between the races. Black Lives Matter came to the forefront. Louis Farrakhan was emboldened, the so-called Reverend of the Nation of Islam, who hates not just Jews, but whites, cops, anyone who isn't like him and isn't a black Muslim. And you've got other groups like the New Black Panthers Party. They are equally responsible, along with the Ku Klux Klan, along with white supremacists, along with others, for the divide that we have today. And the president was absolutely right. No one condones Nazis. Look, I'm of Jewish heritage. That concerns me, and that's to put it mildly, that these people were out there protesting. But the reality is that because of the way Obama behaved in 8 years, because he was only interested about his people, not about all of the American people, because he was trying to recreate the division that occurred before the entry of Martin Luther King onto the scene in the late 50s and early 60s, who was a great man. And by the way, do we take down statues of Martin Luther King because he had communist connections? Obviously not. This was a great man. Nobody's perfect. Jefferson wasn't perfect, and neither was Washington. They did have slaves. That's what the normal was during those days. But they moved on. They actually advocated against slavery. They realized that there needed to be a transition. But this racial divide, which we saw erupt in Dallas, Texas, over a year ago, and I represent an African-American policeman, great man by the name of Demetric Penny, who was assaulted by a disciple of Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam. There's a lawsuit in the Northern District of Texas federal court, and I also have one for the father of a slain police officer, Enrique Zamaripa, who is a fine Mexican-American, and his son was a hero. You know, this was created by Obama and his crowd because they whipped these people up and they got them into a frenzy. And Farrakhan, Sharpton, New Black Panthers, they all had a free pass into the White House. They were a recruiting tool for these white supremacists who rose from the dead. No one heard of the Ku Klux Klan for years or decades. Now, because of this reaction, because of the anti-white attitude of Barack Obama, who feels like he sees persecution around every corner, and he's still whipping it up in his mansion in Colorado, Washington, you have this huge racial divide. So the president was trying to calm things down, and he says, okay, there's fault on all sides. Let's calm down, guys. And then he's named the Nazis, and then he named the white supremacists. But that wasn't enough for the leftist media. They had to continue to destroy him. And, of course, while all this is happening, we have a new terrorist attack, a terrible terrorist attack in Barcelona, Spain. And it tells you this is what happened during the Lewinsky years. I fought Clinton. I got a judgment against him that he actually violated the law and committed a crime. And he took his eye off the ball because of all those scandals, mostly the Lewinsky scandal. And what happened? We had Osama bin Laden and we had 9/11. So let this Barcelona new terrorist attack serve as a warning that the left needs to be slam dunked, that we need to be able to focus on what really counts: terrorism, nuclear capability in North Korea and Iran that can hit us with intercontinental ballistic missiles, and other important issues like Obamacare, tax reform, and other things. But we are being diverted, and that's exactly what the left wants, because they want to reduce the Trump presidency to ash. And you have my pledge as the head of Freedom Watch that we will do all we can legally and ethically to prevent that. So please go to freedomwatchusa.org, freedomwatchusa.org. Contribute handsomely to our cause. We are your Justice Department. We don't even have a Justice Department under current Attorney General Jeff Sessions because he was called a racist. He's too afraid to do anything. So you need somebody who's not afraid. And that's also why I love former Chief Justice Roy Moore, because he's not afraid as well, and you're going to hear from him later in the show. We need to pull together, as Benjamin Franklin said, either we all hang together or separately we won't hang. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Dangerous.
You don't hear, use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special prosecutor.
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I now want to give you an update on the Clive and Bundy prosecution in Las Vegas, Nevada. It gets more and more bizarre. It gets more and more troubling in terms of the state of our justice system. Of course, as you know, I've talked about this before. I asked Attorney General Jeff Sessions to review this case because there's a gross injustice that's been occurring. Clive and Bundy and his sons and the other defendants didn't harm a hair on the head of any federal agent. In fact, it was Clive and Bundy's sister who was viciously attacked and thrown to the ground. His sons were tased. His dog was viciously kicked and harmed. And many of his cattle were killed and secretly buried in a mass grave by the goons of the Bureau of Land Management, who were sent by the hand-picked head of Bureau of Land Management at the time, Harry Reid, senator from Nevada, who was trying to sell the land out from under the Bundys, Bunkerville, where they had ranched for 150 years. And, of course, Obama was offended because Cliven gave an interview where he equated the plight of his family to that of the Negro in the Old South. He thought that was an appropriate word. Martin Luther King had used the word, but Obama took offense. He found that to be, quote, racist, as he finds everything to be racist. And the result is that Cliven and his sons and the others were indicted 2 years later. Well, this case was assigned to a judge, Gloria Navarro, who is out of control. She's the hand-picked lackey of Senator Harry Reid and Obama himself, and she's been perverting justice in this case. And I would urge you to go to freedomwatchusa.org and also cliveandbundydefensefund.org, cliveandbundydefensefund.org. Please contribute to that defense fund, which goes to the defense of Clive and Bundy, the legal defense, and see what this judge has been doing. And just this week, in the retrial of some of the defendants, Cliven's not involved. He'll be tried in about a month along with two of his sons. She had a defendant on the stand, and she won't allow any of these defendants to testify as to the reasons that they came to Bunkerville, because they saw all of the violence that was occurring with regard to the Bundys. And they came armed with their Second Amendment rights which they're allowed to do. And they came to peacefully protest. And when they got there, these goons from the Bureau of Land Management hired mercenaries, some of them, threatened their lives and threatened the Bundys' lives. And they said, basically, we're not going to roll over. But they were armed. Well, the judge won't allow any of these defendants, and the ones that were retried, actually, there was a mistrial a few months ago because the jury just didn't buy this. And now the judge figures out, I'm going to do anything I can to get them convicted. She won't let them testify to anything other than the fact that they had arms and that they pointed some of those arms as alleged to federal officials, to federal officers. They can't explain why they came. They can't explain their intent. They can't talk about their Second Amendment right to bear arms. So one of the defendants got up on the stand and he started to touch a little bit on that issue. And in front of the jury, she orders him off the witness stand, screams at him, slams her fist on the desk, and creates a display. I mean, she's like a little tyrant. And she actually created a mistrial. But of course, she wouldn't grant it. And now the jury's deliberating as we speak. This is what we're dealing with there. And that's why I asked General Jeff Sessions to review this. And he said that he would. I talked to him on the phone. I've communicated with him in email. But then he bowed out because he's under pressure. He's under investigation for alleged Russian connections, which are phony allegations. And he's been called a racist. He's become a little mouse as the Attorney General of the Justice Department. I hate to say that because I like the guy, and he's from the same state as Chief Justice Roy Moore. I'm sure they know each other. And it is a tragedy that the Attorney General has allowed this to continue without reviewing it because his prosecutors have abused their powers. They've gone along with the judge. They have, in fact, suggested that these defendants, in effect, not be allowed to defend themselves by explaining why they went there and why they were armed. So General Jeff Sessions needs to be held to account. And today I'm filing a complaint with the Inspector General of the Department of Justice and also the Ethics Division of the Department of Justice, saying that Attorney General Jeff Sessions has not done his job, and I want this investigated because he gave me his word that he was going to review this, and he broke his word. And the Bundy case is extremely important. Yesterday it's the Bundys. Today it'll be you. They'll be trying to take your guns away from you. They won't let you defend yourself. And as you know, the Second Amendment was put into effect by our founding fathers to protect us from tyranny of the government. It wasn't put into effect to protect us from our own tyranny among ourselves, although that is legitimate as well. So I want you to go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org, contribute to Cliven's defense, because he's coming up to trial in a month, and we need to have this Attorney General review this case before that happens. This is a case that concerns not just Cliven Bundy and his family, but all of us, because if the government behaves this way, we are back to the time prior to the American Revolution. We'll be right back.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I have with us now Justice Roy Moore, former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, someone who I've known, someone who I admire, an individual who, if I may say so myself, I think we're quite alike in many ways. We stand up for what we think is right, and we don't worry about the consequence. As you know, Judge Roy Moore, when he was a judge, refused to take down the 10 Commandments in the courthouse, and that cost him his job as a judge. Later, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama, he felt that the law requiring the Supreme Court's ruling gay marriage was not constitutional and not correct under Alabama law. Let him explain that. He stood up for that. And, of course, he's no longer Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Alabama in that regard. And I also encountered him in a lawsuit. We never talked about it, involving whether a birth certificate needed to be presented to run for the presidency in Alabama. And that, of course, he was one of the few justices. He was the only one, the dissenting justice, who required that. It was in the context of President Obama. But I want to introduce you to him because he's truly a great man. He's a Christian. He believes in God. He can cite the Bible, like it's Sunday school. And right now we're in a discussion in this country about whether or not statues of Civil War heroes should be taken down. So I want to let the justice speak for himself. He's running for the U.S. Senate in Alabama, and I want you to hear from him. And this show is heard in Alabama as well as throughout the United States. Justice Moore, thank you for coming on our show.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you for the wonderful work you do in trying to clear up the things in the judicial branch, and that certainly needs to be done. We need to go back to our Constitution, back to the rules that made this country great.
Well, I want to ask you about what your take is on this whole issue of taking down Civil War statues.
Well, I don't agree with taking down any monuments, because monuments don't hate, people hate. Taking down monuments are erasing our past. If you erase your past, you do what they've done in communist countries around the world, to try to get rid of any representation of where you were in history. You know, the United States has gone through several various serious problems that we've had. Slavery was a problem, and we've had problems with slavery. But we got to remember that the past represents where we've been, not where we are today. I guess the best explanation was given by Woodrow Wilson in 1911, 2 years before he took over the presidency and the 28th presidency. I don't agree with all of his doctrines and philosophy, but certainly he knew history. He said that a nation which does not remember what it was yesterday does not know what it is today nor what it is trying to do. We're trying to do a futile thing if we do not know where we came from and what we've been about. When you try to take down monuments, you're trying to erase your history, and that's not good for anybody. And it's good to know what history we had and how we've overcome the bad things of history and what's made our history good. So I don't agree with taking down monuments, and certainly when they took the Ten Commandments monument down, people were offended at it, and they protested it. But certainly there was nothing prohibitive about the acknowledgement of God, and until we recognize God again, we have no basis for our morality. We don't have any basis for loving one another, because we're all created equally in the eyes of God. And that was contained in the Ten Commandments, that God created us, and He is the Creator God. We've got to go back to being indivisible and one nation under God, like we were meant to be in 1954, and even when we were formed in 1776.
Well, I agree with you, and I think the President, Trump, has taken a pummeling unfairly. Number one, I've written a column last week pointing out that, of course, there were issues on both sides at that riot that occurred in Charlottesville. Then, of course, in my native city, so to speak, I went to Duke University in Durham, North Carolina as a young man. A statue of a Civil War soldier was torn down and then kicked viciously. And it was like trampling on the graves of the people that died for Dixie. And, you know, I kind of feel like a quasi-Southerner myself. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but I spent my adult years in the South, and then all the years that I've spent in Washington, D.C., that's technically the South as well. And I understand the Southern pride. I understand the Southern heritage. And it's not something that you need to be ashamed of. I guess what I don't understand, and the President had it right, is that where does it end? Do you take down statues of Washington? Do you take down the Jefferson Memorial, now Al Sharpton, that vigilante that, you know, basically extorts money and doesn't, in my view, he's not a sincere civil rights leader like Martin Luther King was, you know, and I believe Martin Luther King was a great man. But now he wants to defund the Jefferson Memorial because Jefferson had slaves. You know, everything has to be analyzed in the context of the time in history, I believe. And the president was right, and he's getting vilified by the left, and he's being abandoned by the Republican establishment, particularly in Washington, D.C. And I believe that we, the American people, need to stand up for him and stand up for these principles, that we just can't simply trash our history. And so, you know, I appreciate the comments you've just made, Your Honor.
Well, it seems to me that we're more interested in taking down monuments than going forward. We've got so many issues, and those issues are being not addressed because people are going around taking down monuments and then trying to handle the consequences of doing such things as that. We need to get past these sort of things and get together as one people. Slavery was wrong. We overcame slavery. We had a great war to move us past that period, and of course it wasn't all about slavery. It was about other things. It was about states' rights, as we well know. But we've got to realize it's part of history. You can't erase history. It's trying to erase where you came from as a child. It doesn't do you any good. You might have had hard things happen to you as a child, but you also realize that's what you came through. And if you came through in a better person for it, then it's the knowledge of that history isn't going to hurt you. It's going to help you remember that.
I agree with you completely. And, in fact, I've written a column today. It'll be coming out tonight on WND.com, World Net Daily, which relates back to what happened during the Clinton years. As you know, Your Honor, I was holding the Clintons' feet to the fire. They committed over 40 scandals, Bill and Hillary Clinton. At that time, I had founded and was running Judicial Watch. Now I run Freedom Watch, which I founded after my Senate campaign. You can find that at freedomwatchusa.org. And one of the things I pointed out, because you, of course, had this Monica Lewinsky scandal, which was the least of the Clinton scandals. It was terrible. It was unethical. It was immoral what the president did with this intern. But it diverted the nation's attention away from the rise of Osama bin Laden. We took our eye off the ball because the media got preoccupied on that. And, of course, now we see with the attacks in Barcelona yesterday, it's a reminder, as well as the threats that we face from North Korea and Iran, over nuclear missiles and nuclear tipped missiles that can reach the United States. And they're both partners. They're working together. Iran will have it soon as well. Now we seem to be dealing with issues that, in fact, divert the nation's attention. And that's what scares me the most. And that's why, frankly, and I'm saying this in a personal sense because I've never endorsed anybody, frankly, personally, but I feel very strongly about you because you're one of the few people that will go up to the Senate when you're successful, and you will hold the feet to the fire of the other senators. When I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2004, my concept was to take Judicial Watch, the idea of it, inside of the U.S. Senate, to be like a Trojan horse, to even bring lawsuits if I had to try to shake things up in Washington, D.C. And I can tell you, and you know this as well, I've been up on Washington, D.C. on a frequent basis, even though I spend a lot of time out of the nation's capital these days. Nothing gets done. No one wants to hear anything. It's all a dog and pony show. And it's getting on Fox News or getting on CNN and MSNBC if you're another political persuasion. But it's not doing the job. It's simply getting reelected, in my view, stuffing money into your pockets. And that's why they hate President Trump, because he's breaking up their money train. So we really need a Roy Moore up there. And, I hope if you're elected, and I believe that you will be, to work with you, because there is really no one else up there at this time. So I wanted to get your impression of that, what it is you want to accomplish as a U.S. Senator. I've just given you my take on what I think you're going to do, but only you know.
Well, I think I want to move the Senate and the nation forward. I think we need to get over just keeping our jobs and doing the same thing because we've got a lot of privileges and position and power. We need to go forward. And I think a lot of this is to resist President Trump's intention to do just that. He wants a change. The people voted for a change, and nothing's happened because we're talking about what he said, what he didn't say, what he meant. Quite frankly, that's not that important. He tried to address it as best he could, and I think he did address it as best he could. And I see it senseless to stand around and talk about what he didn't say and what he did say and try to get into his mind. My goodness, everybody knew that for a person to get killed is wrong and should be punished, whoever did it. And that's it. But to think of who was doing this and who was doing that, you can't. You can argue about that all day long, and what's going to happen is our country is losing out on advancing things that we really need. We need to repeal Obamacare. Obamacare has been a blight on this country. It has caused rates to go up. Anybody that's seen the rates go down, I'd like to talk to them, because I don't know how the rates could have gone down. And in places, it's gone up 600%. We've got higher deductibles. And at the same time, we've got restrictions from dealing across state lines in most of the states, because they've created monopolies under the McCarran-Ferguson Act of 1945. Congress needs to repeal that act. It is not hard to repeal that act. It's adverse to some insurance companies, I'll tell you that, and that's the problem. They're controlled by special.
Well, that's right. They are, and I know this personally because I had insurance with Cigna in Florida, and without them even informing me, nor my insurance agent, I'm kind of upset at him, they pulled out of Florida. And now I haven't been feeling well lately, and I'm having to go out of pocket for a lot of medical expenses, without any kind of real insurance. I had to go to Lloyd's of London to get insurance to bridge before I can qualify for Medicare next year on my birthday. So I have a personal experience with that, and at least I have the money to be able to pay doctors, but a lot of people don't, and they're left out there in the cold with this crisis. Now you have a Republican Party that doesn't have the courage to even come together to solve it, and that's why I believe we need somebody like you up there that's going to shake it up.
I think what Donald Trump said about that is very effective. If you take congressmen out from under the Obamacare and let them pay for their own premiums, then they'd realize what they've done to the rest of the country.
Well, congressmen never pay for anything. I can tell you, in all my years in Washington, D.C., sometimes I've had lunch with them and dinner. They'll never take $1 out of their pocket. I don't bribe them or anything like that, but you go to pay the bill and they look at you when you ask them to pay half like you're in outer space. But one of the things I've seen as well is that we need someone like the president. I know that he didn't endorse you initially, but I believe he will come around. I don't think he was well informed as to who is going to be his true ally up there, and he does need allies at this time.
I think that's very true, Larry. I think he was not only not well informed, he was misinformed. And I think that's the thing that needs to get to the president, is that I do stand for the change in the country. I do stand for making the Senate move forward. Addressing this filibuster rule that prevents them from voting is one of the first things you need, because the filibuster rule is a supermajority rule, not imposed by the founders of the Constitution and the writers of that document, but by Senate rules. And certainly it's adverse to the rules which govern the passage of legislation. So we can't get legislation even addressed unless there's 60%. That's not in the Constitution.
You are a visionary, and we need people of your moral, ethical, and religious character. God bless you, and good luck. Stay tuned. There's more coming up.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
We've been talking about a lot of injustice and hypocrisy and reverse racism and division during this edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, and I want to give you another example of this, and hopefully this will turn out well. But there was word this week that President Trump was going to grant a pardon to my client and friend, Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Maricopa County, Arizona. Of course, he's no longer sheriff because he was politically assassinated with a phony criminal complaint that was filed against him by a judge that hates his guts, that wanted to make a name for himself, G. Murray Snow. He was accused of violating a court order which required him not to profile Latinos in day worker sites and other places in his county. And in fact, he didn't do that. And there was something that occurred, but it wasn't done at his direction, but they tried to string him up, in effect. We're in the West. Stringing up lynching is a historical method of dealing with people, but they did this legally. And this crazy and unethical judge, Murray Snow, referred him for criminal prosecution to the Justice Department. And, of course, the same request was made that I made with regard to the Bundy trial when Attorney General Jeff Sessions came in. We said, can you please review this matter? It was not just me, but other people asked them to do it. I don't represent the sheriff with regard to his troubles with G. Murray Snow or in Arizona with regard to profiling, but I did successfully represent him in a case that ended the illegal amnesty that was granted by President Obama to over 5 million illegal aliens. But Sessions didn't do his job. He didn't review that. And in fact, he promised Arpaio that he would do that. But what happened was that Arpaio was then tried by another judge, a buddy of G. Murray Snow, Susan Bolton, not coincidentally a Clinton appointee. And she wouldn't even give Sheriff Arpaio a jury trial. She decided the case herself, and she found him in criminal contempt. And of course, the leftist media jumped all over that, particularly since Arpaio had supported President Trump in the election last fall, and they destroyed him, not only in the United States, but around the world. They've trashed his reputation. They, in fact, gave him his obituary as if he had died. Well, he is 85, and thank God he's in good health. And thank God that he's still a very strong man. But to take that kind of pummeling in the media was just unbelievable. But, of course, as I said, this week we found out that the president is considering giving Sheriff Arpaio a pardon. And thank God that that's happening. The sheriff's going to be going to, the president's going to be going to Phoenix, Arizona next week. The mayor of Phoenix, Arizona told him he's not welcome. Of course, he's a leftist as well. He's in the hip pocket, George Soros and everybody else. The current sheriff, because Arpaio lost after he was criminally charged, is also in the hip pocket of Soros. Soros spent over $1 million to get this guy elected. And this is what we're dealing with in the country today. And this is why we need to stand up for our own rights. We cannot depend on the government. We can't depend on Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He's not doing his job there. He's doing a good job on immigration, but that's about it. He's abdicated his responsibility in every respect. So watch what we do. We're filing a complaint with the Inspector General today to have the Attorney General reviewed for failure to do his duty, failure to uphold his oath of office, because there are some really big injustices that are occurring. And he's shying away from them because he doesn't want to be tarred and feathered. He already has been. But you know what? You can't worry about those things. And that's why our interview today with former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, Roy Moore, is so important. Because here's one of the few men in this country, and I say this in my personal capacity, and I endorse him in my personal capacity, not as a head of a public interest group. But you need people like that in the U.S. Senate. You need people like that in government. And currently, there is absolutely no one in government like that. They all sliver around Washington. They all are making money for themselves. They're all pontificating on Fox News, CNN, or MSNBC. But we don't have any true patriots anymore. And people like Sheriff Arpaio, the president, and others just simply get pummeled and vilified. Anybody with any sense of right or wrong, they try to destroy. And that's why I want you to come in and listen to the show every week, Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Go to freedomwatchusa.org, freedomwatchusa.org. Please contribute to our cause, become a member, get our newsletters, get our emails. We are a citizens' army. We do it legally, but we need to have it done right now because our country hangs in the balance. God bless you.